Most of you probably don't know this, but before I started Mother's Basement, I worked as a gaming critic. That gave me an excuse to play a heck of a lot of video games, but that's not all I want to do with my life. A big part of why I quit to start this channel is that I watch a frankly irresponsible amount of anime, and I wanted to have an outlet for that like I did for gaming. Mainly that takes the form of What's in an OP, but that's a more retrospective series, and I'm into simulcasts in a big way, so at the end of every season, I'm gonna do a rundown of all the shows that I watched and tell you which I think is show of the season. Without further ado, let's cap off spring 2015. At the start of the season, my hopes were not high for Punchline. The tagline, "If he sees underwear, humanity will be destroyed," spoke to a puerile and underwhelming premise, but it was an original anime airing in the Noitamina block, and from MAPPA no less, so I gave it a shot. When episode 1 wrapped, my first thought was, wow, this is a lot better than it has any right to be, and a quick Google search showed why. The show is written by Kotaro Uchikoshi, the maverick behind the Zero Escape series of visual novels. 999 and Virtue's Last Reward have some of the most nuanced writing and best characters of any game I've ever played, and Punchline feels like a worthy successor to that. With an incredibly likable core cast, an intriguing mystery, and one of the most satisfying endings of any show I've seen in a long time, it's a treat from start to finish. And the fan service is alright too, I guess, if you're into that. Speaking of fan service, Danmachi, or Is It Wrong to Pick Up Girls in a Dungeon, is being called the second coming of Sword Art Online, and while I can definitely see why, I don't think the comparison is quite apt. Yes, they're both pseudo-fantasy harem shows built around deconstructing JRPG tropes, but there's a lot of differences between them. The biggest one by far is personality. Danmachi has it, and Sword Art Online kinda doesn't. Danmachi is full of distinctive characters with their own ambitions and backstories. SAO has basically two archetypes, boring and batshit fucking crazy. Danmachi's writers don't have to try too hard with their largely cliched cast, but at least they try a little. I mean, look at the protagonists. Both Bell and Kirito are unreasonably overpowered, but Bell is powerful because he's a quick learner and never gives up, whereas Kirito is a kendo expert, a pro gamer, and a genius hacker before the series even begins. Bell gets his ass kicked repeatedly as he grows, while Kirito only loses when someone else cheats, and Bell's the one who's supposed to be ordained as a hero by God. I'm not saying Danmachi is a great show by any means. If I were rating these, I'd give it like 6 out of 10. I'm only saying that we shouldn't lump it in with SAO, where the sole purpose is letting the audience insert itself into the middle of a harem as some nerd ubermensch. Yamada-Kun and the Seven Witches was something I picked up on a whim, and I was surprised to discover a show much better than its premise would lead you to believe. It's not really good, the plot is still bogged down by a lot of harem tropes, but it does actually have a plot with an ending. Crazy. Yamada is pretty ballsy as harem protagonists go, which is to say that he has any testicles whatsoever, and he doesn't beat around the bush. When he decides that he likes his main love interest, Shiraishi, he tells her pretty much straight away. And the plot complications come from, like, actual plot elements that don't have to do with people being complete idiots. The witch powers don't just give Yamada an excuse to mac on a bunch of different girls, they actually create a tangible obstacle between him and Shiraishi, and once that's cleared, they actually start going out. The fact that it has closure makes this series substantially better than most other harems, and the OP is pretty great too. On the subject of lacking closure, spring gave us a new season of Schrodinger's Harem by Shaft, the show that will never, ever, 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 ever end. Nisekoi has a lot of very fun characters, and their antics are entertaining, but that's all you will ever get out of this show. This whole series is a gigantic waste of time, and the last episode of this season does its very best to make that clear. Chitoge hums and haws about telling Raku how she feels for 10 goddamn minutes before finally concluding that there's no rush. Yeah, fuck you two. But I'm still totally gonna watch the next season because of Shaft and Best Girl Tsugumi. What can I say? I'm weak. Of course, when it's supported by really strong writing, some romantic tension can really help a story. MyTeenage Romcom SNAFU is one of those purely character-driven shows that's a little hard to pin down, but also hard to put down. Hikigaya Hachiman's detached approach to tackling high school dilemmas makes it interesting to watch his plans unfold, and his attitude and those of the characters around him really speak to fundamental aspects of adolescence. It's also interesting to watch a love triangle where all of the involved characters are intelligent enough to be at least somewhat aware of each other's feelings and stall on purpose to preserve their friendship, unlike a certain other show. With that said, while the writing is great and the direction makes the most mundane things hilarious, I feel like the show is a bit weak when it tries to moralize or espouse philosophy. It strikes me almost as a Japanese take on one of John Green's novels, with all of the qualities and problems that brings to mind. except for the high youth mortality rate. At the start of the season, it felt like the writers went the standard route of introducing a new girl instead of making progress in Hikigaya's love triangle, or having him just get with Totsuka already. I mean, come on. But the finale certainly overturned those fears in a touching way that both serves as a fitting conclusion and sets up one hell of a cliffhanger for the next season. Ultimately, no matter how good UFO Table's adaptation of Unlimited Blade Works turned out to be, it was never going to hold a candle to Fate Zero. Gen Urobuchi's prequel novel outstripped the original visual novel in every way, and Shiro Emiya is a piss-poor protagonist next to his father, Kiritsugu. Despite that, I think it's safe to call this incarnation of Fate's Day Night a success, at least in comparison to the previous abysmal attempt at bringing Type Moon's landmark game to the small screen. It's full of great action scenes with feature-quality animation, and if you don't know how the story goes, some of the twists it throws at you are pretty surprising. Not the best show overall, but it had its moments, and Brave Shine was a great OP. Yet another installment of KyoAni's continuing Cute Girls Doing Cute Things series, Hibike Euphonium is about cute girls playing in a high school orchestra. At first glance, this show seems like K-On! With more brass, but there's a little more to it than that. I mean, of course there is. K-On! Was based on a jokey comic strip, whereas Euphonium is based on a series of novels. That series features rich and intriguing characters, each with their own motivations and goals related to the music club. It concerns itself heavily with the minutiae and challenges of getting a concert band into shape for competition, making sure everyone plays on the same skill level, dealing with internal conflicts, that sort of thing, which makes it more interesting than your standard moe slice of life. Unfortunately, it ends about halfway through what's obviously a longer story arc, and with very little in the way of proper closure. Hopefully it'll see a second season. What a fantastic ride this has been so far. David Productions' adaptation of Hirohiko Araki's seminal shonen action series was one of the best shows on TV from the very first episode of Phantom Blood, and it's only gotten better as it's gone on. I don't think I've ever seen a more faithful translation from page to screen. The fights depicted throughout this last season of Stardust Crusaders have all been incredible, especially the final confrontation with Dio, which will go down in history as one of the greatest shonen finales of any series ever. It was full of more badass moments and quotable lines than I'd care to count, but the story has just begun. I won't be satisfied until all 8 parts are animated, starting with part 4. But it must be reiterated that what we've gotten so far is freaking excellent, especially the OPs, which, if you haven't seen it yet, I've analyzed on my other series, What's in an OP, link in the doobly-doo or on the screen right here, right now. On the other end of the vampire spectrum from the great and fabulous Dio lies the grim and gritty Seraph of the End, Vampire Reign, a show about a world ruled by bloodsuckers. With strong religious overtones, particularly themes of gods and demons, and uniform designs heavily inspired by the old Imperial Japanese Army, the series is more than a little reminiscent of Shin Megami Tensei. As is the case with the classic Atlas role-playing franchise, morality here seems to be a bit less black and white than it first appears, and, well, I'm not gonna spoil it for you, but you should watch the series. There's very little here you haven't seen before, but it's all executed exceptionally well, especially when it comes to the visuals. Studio Wit has absolutely knocked it out of the park with their animation and their hand-painted backgrounds, which capture a beautiful post-apocalyptic Tokyo. On top of that, the season ended on a really strong note that left me completely stoked for the follow-up that's coming in October. Kekai Sensen, or Blood Blockade Battlefront as Funimation would have you call it, is probably the most fun show of this season. In tone, it feels like a mashup of Baccano and FLCL, a high-energy contemporary fantasy series about a New York City infested by otherworldly monsters and the people who fight bravely to keep those monsters safe. Spurred by great comedy and some of the most inventive fights in any anime, this might well be the best show to come out of Bone's recent resurgence. They managed to make Hell Salem's lot feel like a believable place in spite of how surreal it is, and they keep the plot moving at a lightning-fast pace amid all the world-building that they do. But all that's kind of secondary to how great the characters are. I mean, I love every single member of this cast, especially the protagonist Leonardo, who has a great personality and an even better superpower that they do a lot of imaginative stuff with. Usually in a shonen series, the protagonist is just some bland blob, but here he's the driving force of the whole show. But we really shouldn't expect anything less from the mangaka who created Trigun. If I had one complaint about this series, it would be that it's far too short at only 12 episodes, but Bones has been good about securing sequels to great off-the-wall shows like Noragami, Space Dandy, and Chaika, so I think there's a good chance that the story will continue once there's more manga to adapt. I can't think of any show that I've ever seen that's made me cry as much or as frequently as Plastic Memories. The premise is basically the saddest part of Blade Runner meets the structure of Planetes. In a world where androids can be built with souls but only live a decade before suffering rampancy, a young man joins an office tasked with retrieving them before their time is up. This structure allows the show to tell a number of incredibly touching, unconventional short stories about death and the people we leave behind. Normally it takes a few episodes or even an entire season for a show to get me invested enough to actually cry, but Plastic Memories managed it in just one, with a heart-wrenching story of an old woman saying goodbye to her dying granddaughter, and it did it while going about world building and establishing its core cast. The way it plays on primal emotions might feel cheap next to the build-up of something like Anohana, but those powerful short stories are strung together by an overarching narrative about the protagonist Tsukasa falling for a cute, clumsy Giftia named Isla who doesn't have long to live, and that story is equally powerful. A story like that can't really hit home unless you're invested in the romance. The show itself demonstrates this a few times. The short stories about people romantically involved with their Giftias just don't have the same impact as those with more universal themes of family. But through perfect pacing and complications that actually make sense, no random stupid misunderstandings here, Plastic Memories makes you really want to see Tsukasa and Isla together, and when they finally do get together, you get to be happy with them, watching them date over 2 full episodes before the ending. Shit, I'm tearing up now just thinking about it. All that in an original animated series, but those are always the best, aren't they? Plus some truly beautiful music and visuals. Plastic Memories is definitely my show of the season. But wait, you guys probably want to know what I thought of the season's OPs and EDs too, right? Well, I'm planning to do a comprehensive top list to close out the year, and I don't want to give that away, but I will tell you what my personal favorites are. This isn't meant to indicate quality, just the intro and outro that I liked most. And this season, Kekkai Sensen handily swept both categories. Its OP builds up with a quiet intensity, using beautiful and evocative imagery in conjunction with a memorable rock song to create an air of gravitas, while the infectious, funky ED does a great job capturing the series' sense of fun. If I ever start covering EDs, that'll definitely be one of the first I tackle. All in all, spring 2015 has been a really great season for anime fans. Whether you like action, romance, or a little bit of both, there was something to hold your attention, and some of the best shows of the season are still ongoing. I've got a feeling this is going to be a really good year. And I mean that for me personally as well. I'm amazed that so many of you guys have found my videos and like what I'm making, and I'm beyond excited to see where the channel can go from here. Video game reviews are just around the corner, starting with Xenoblade Chronicles, and next week I'll have a What's in an OP for Spice and Wolf, along with a review on my friend Acer's channel. I hope you enjoy those when they're out, and if you haven't seen them yet, I hope you enjoy checking out the other videos on my channel. This week's highlight, because I apparently have a thing for dying teenagers, is my Your Lie in April analysis. And of course, if you enjoyed this video and you haven't done it yet, be sure to like and subscribe for more like it. As always, this is Jeff Thu, professional shitbag, signing out from his mother's basement.